A policeman pulled up a girl's skirt in the park. He didn't know who was watching. Subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The sky over Pine Grove wore its usual late autumn gray, clouds dragging their bellies low across the horizon like tired beasts reluctant to let go of the season. Beneath them, the town moved slowly, gently, as though it too felt the weight of the cold creeping in through the sidewalks. At the edge of the municipal park, where the trimmed hedges gave way to an open stretch of benches and bare trees, Lexi Riley sat alone with a book in her lap, unaware that this quiet morning was about to shift the course of her life. She preferred this corner of the park, far from the noise of the basketball courts and the chatter of joggers. The lake, just beyond the tree line, lay still, a mirror of muted silver reflecting skeletal branches. Lexi, with her oversized denim jacket and thrift store boots, was a portrait of calm solitude. Her hair was braided neatly into a bun at the back of her head, her glasses slipping ever so slightly down her nose as she leaned into the dog-eared paperback. She read slowly, lips parting with each sentence as though tasting the words, savoring them. It wasn't that Lexi was antisocial. She just didn't trust crowds. Growing up, she had learned the value of quiet spaces, of moving through the world without drawing attention. She had been the kind of child who memorized every exit in a building, who flinched instinctively when people raised their voices. At 19, she carried herself with the caution of someone twice her age. There was a thoughtfulness in the way she moved, like each gesture had been measured in advance. Her mother worked double shifts at the hospital and rarely slept more than 3 hours a night. Lexi had learned early not to complain, not to ask for more than what was necessary. Her world was one of books, part-time jobs, and long walks that led to benches like this one where her imagination could roam without risk. But even here, even now, she was never truly at ease. She was always waiting. For what, she didn't know. Until that morning. The hum of tires on gravel reached her ears first. She didn't look up immediately. Cars often pulled through the park's narrow access road, usually caretakers or groundskeepers. But when the engine cut off and the car door slammed, she felt a chill run through her spine. She looked up just as 2 police officers stepped onto the paved path, boots crisp and polished, uniforms dark against the pale surroundings. They didn't come jogging toward her. They walked slowly, deliberately, the way someone walks when they're not in a hurry to explain themselves. Lexi sat a little straighter, the book forgotten in her lap. Her fingers moved instinctively to the strap of her bag, tightening it. The older officer, tall, thick in the shoulders, with weathered skin and a square jaw, walked ahead of his partner. His name tag read Boyd, and his gaze held the hollow, indifferent weight of someone long past the need to pretend they cared. The younger one, Balu, looked barely older than Lexi herself. His face was lean, pale, and his eyes shifted constantly, not out of vigilance but uncertainty. "Morning," Boyd said, his voice flat like a coin tossed without care. "What's a girl like you doing out here alone?" Lexi blinked. "I'm just reading," she said quietly. "It's a public park." Boyd chuckled, the sound dry and humorless. "Sure it is. And we're just making sure everything stays safe and friendly." Baloo hovered a few feet back, his hands tucked behind his back in a posture that mimicked discipline but radiated discomfort. He didn't speak. Lexi felt her stomach tighten. She tried to maintain eye contact without letting it seem like a challenge. "I have ID if you want to see it." Boyd didn't reach for it. Instead, he stepped closer, scanning her up and down, as though her presence required explanation. Funny thing, he said, voice low now. People think public means they get to squat wherever they want and look cute doing it. Lexi didn't reply. She reached slowly into her bag, keeping her movements deliberate, controlled. But before she could retrieve anything, Boyd flicked his wrist. With practiced motion, he tapped the end of his baton against the edge of her skirt and flipped it upward. It happened in a blink, just enough for a gust of wind to catch the hem, just enough for her thighs to be exposed, just enough to humiliate. Lexi gasped, instinctively slapping her hands down to her legs, face burning with a mixture of shame and fury. Her book fell to the ground beside her boot. "What the hell are you doing?" she said, her voice cracking. "You just assaulted me." Boyd let out a short laugh. "Relax. It's Sunday. We're just having a little fun." Baloo gave a strained chuckle, then immediately looked away. He knew. She could see it in the way he swallowed, in the way he refused to meet her eyes. He knew it was wrong, and he did nothing. Lexi stood up, not because she felt brave, but because she refused to remain seated while someone tried to make her feel small. Her legs trembled, but her spine held. "You think this is funny?" she said. "You think you can do this to anyone?" "Not anyone," Boyd smirked. "Just girls like you." The words hit harder than the baton. Lexi's mind reeled, but somewhere beneath the fear, beneath the shame, a spark flickered to life. Her hand moved toward her phone, not shaken, just moving with the precision of someone who had reached the end of silence. She dialed a number she hadn't used in years. It rang twice. "Maya," she whispered, "I need you." There was a beat of silence on the line, then one word. "Where?" "Pine Grove Park. East Bench, near the lake." "Don't move." Lexi ended the call and sat back down. She folded her skirt tightly around her knees, staring straight ahead at the lake. She didn't look at Boyd. She didn't speak to Baloo. Her fingers clenched around her phone like it was a weapon. The breeze picked up again, whistling through the trees, but she felt nothing. The shame had burned itself clean. What remained now was memory of a night when she was 12, hiding behind a radiator while a man screamed and a woman in uniform knelt beside her and said, "You don't have to stay here anymore." Lexi hadn't seen Maya Williams in over 5 years, but she had never forgotten her, and Maya had promised once that if Lexi ever needed her again, she'd come. 15 minutes, Maya had said. Lexi didn't know what those minutes would bring, but she wasn't afraid anymore. Not exactly. She sat still, her breath shallow, but her resolve hardening like cooling steel. Boyd loomed nearby, arms crossed, smug in his stillness. Baloo shifted from foot to foot. Lexi didn't care. She wasn't alone anymore. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was waiting. Like the first second before a thunderclap. Like the pause before something breaks. The wind shifted direction as the clouds broke just enough to allow a sliver of pale sun to reach the far side of Pine Grove Park. The sunbeam slanted down through the bare branches like a silent promise. Fleeting, uncertain, but there. Lexi didn't move. She sat with her skirt tucked tightly under her legs, phone clutched in her hand, her gaze fixed on the still waters of the lake, pretending not to hear the faint snickers of Officer Boyd behind her or the awkward shuffling of Officer Baloo. 15 minutes. She held on to that number like a lifeline. On the other side of the park, past the stretch of empty tennis courts and the gravel path that cut through the line of oaks, Ronda Rousey jogged to a stop beside a cast-iron water fountain. Her breath visible in the cold morning air, she leaned forward, resting her gloved hands on her knees for a beat, then reached up to adjust the strap of the light gray sports bag slung over her shoulder. The old ache in her left shoulder was back, dull but persistent. Some ghosts of the octagon never left. She squinted against the pale light, scanned the park instinctively, the way she'd been trained to years ago. Not for threats necessarily, but for energy shifts, for things that didn't feel right. It had become second nature. She spotted the patrol car almost immediately. Parked off the access road where it shouldn't have been, positioned near a bench with two officers standing far too close to a single figure. Ronda frowned. She had passed that bench before, even recognized the girl who often sat there reading. Always alone, always quiet. Lexi, wasn't it? She had once corrected the pronunciation when Ronda had asked if her name was short for Alexis during a self-defense workshop at the local community center. Lexi Riley, 19. Smart, serious, with a silence about her that felt heavier than youth should carry. Ronda began walking, at first without conscious decision. Her steps lengthened as her instincts sharpened. She couldn't hear what was being said, but the stance of the older officer was all wrong. Too relaxed, too entitled, the way predators look when they think no one's watching. Then she saw Lexi flinch. Not dramatically, just enough for someone trained in body language to catch the spike of panic. Lexi's hands moved quickly to her lap, clutching at fabric. The taller officer's baton was still raised from a lazy motion that no longer looked so casual. Ronda stopped. Her fingers curled into fists at her sides. In her mind, time split. One half of her, the trained fighter, assessed, measured, planned. The other half, the woman who had been groped by a drunk coach at 13, who had spent years choking down her rage until it became strength, burned. She began walking again, faster now, her boots crunching over the gravel with purpose. She unzipped her jacket slightly to reveal the dark blue shirt beneath. Standard issue for off-duty city volunteer instructors, still stamped with a faded emblem near the shoulder. Not a cop, but close enough to get second glances from anyone in uniform. Officer Boyd noticed her first. He turned with a smirk already forming on his face, a smirk that faltered when Ronda didn't slow down. Baloo stepped back instinctively, like his spine recognized a superior before his mind did. "Excuse me?" Ronda said, voice clear, projecting. "What exactly is happening here?" Lexi didn't turn. She was trembling, but her posture remained stiff, proud. Boyd straightened slightly. "Just a routine check. Girl didn't look familiar. Figured we'd make sure she wasn't loitering or casing anything." Ronda stopped a few feet away. She crossed her arms over her chest, eyes narrowing. "She has a book in her lap, and she's been coming here every week for months. Try again." Baloo shifted again. "We didn't. There wasn't. I saw what you did." Ronda's voice was ice over steel. "You used your baton to lift her skirt." Boyd sneered. "Got a lot of opinions for someone out of uniform." Ronda stepped closer, close enough that Boyd's hand drifted toward his belt, not out of fear, but reflexively, like a dog baring teeth. "Try me," she said. For a moment, time thickened. Baloo looked like he wanted to melt into the bench. Lexi's eyes shifted slightly, just enough to catch Ronda's figure now standing between her and the officers. "What's your name?" Ronda demanded. Boyd smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Officer Garrett Boyd." "Badge number?" He didn't answer. "Fine," Ronda said. "Then we'll do this the other way." She pulled her phone from her coat pocket, tapped the screen twice, and lifted it so the camera faced them. "You're on record." The smirk disappeared. Baloo's voice broke in, thin and shaky. "We weren't doing anything wrong." "You stood there and watched," Ronda snapped. "That's worse." Several joggers had slowed nearby. A woman with a stroller paused at the edge of the path. Two teenage boys on bikes stopped talking and turned their heads. Phones began rising slowly, discreetly. Lexi stood now. Her legs trembled, but she stood. "I called someone," she said quietly. Boyd turned to her. "Who?" Before Lexi could answer, a deep, growling engine cut through the air from the side road, the unmistakable sound of a modified V8. The crowd instinctively turned toward it. A dusty Dodge Charger rolled up behind the patrol car and came to a stop without sirens, without flashing lights. The engine idled for a second before going silent. The door opened, and from it emerged a tall, dark-skinned woman in a civilian jacket over a crisp navy blue shirt. Her black hair was pulled into a braid so tight it didn't sway when she moved. She wore no hat, but her badge glinted on her belt, and the silence around her arrival was heavier than any siren. Lexi's face broke. Her posture didn't collapse, but something in her breath shifted. "Maya," she whispered. Maya Williams didn't speak as she approached. Her boots crunched the gravel with the same rhythm as Ronda's had earlier, but heavier, like each step carried the weight of decision. She stopped 10 feet away. "Badge numbers," she said, voice flat. Boyd turned. "Excuse me? Name and badge number now." "I don't think you understand who you're talking to." Maya pulled her ID from her belt and flipped it open. The gold shield of internal affairs caught the weak sunlight like a blade. "Sergeant Maya Williams. Off duty, but not off jurisdiction." Ballou stepped back, pale. "We were just," he started. "I'm not speaking to you yet," Maya said without looking at him. Boyd's face twitched. He squared his shoulders. She looked suspicious. "She's holding a book, not a weapon," Maya replied. "She could have been casing the area." "No," Ronda said from the side. "You saw a quiet black girl alone and thought she was easy to intimidate." The crowd was thicker now. People were watching, some were filming, some weren't even pretending not to. Maya took another step forward. "Did you touch her?" "She's making things up," Boyd growled. "Then you won't mind if I pull footage from the park surveillance or your body cams." Neither man answered. Ballou's voice broke again, quieter this time. "Mine's charging at the station." Maya turned to Lexi, her voice softer. "You okay?" Lexi nodded. Not a firm nod, one that barely moved her chin, but it was enough. "She didn't cry," someone from the crowd muttered. "She just sat there, but I saw him." An older black man stepped forward. He wore a veteran's cap and walked with a cane. He flipped her skirt up, thought it was funny. Maya turned back to Boyd. "Badge number." He said nothing. Ronda stepped forward now. "You know what happens next," she said. Lexi spoke clearly, voice barely above a whisper, but sharp. "Garrett Boyd, badge 31478. His partner is James Ballou, badge 30952. I memorized them." Maya nodded. "Good. Anyone who saw what happened, please stay. IA is en route. Your statements matter." Boyd stared at Ronda now, then Maya. "You're going to regret making this a show." Maya moved so close to him that he could see his own reflection in her mirrored lenses. "No," she said calmly. "You're going to regret thinking no one would ever show up." Lexi exhaled, not in relief, but in something like belief. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of the uniform, because today the uniform had turned to protect her, not crush her, and behind her stood not just one woman, but two. One who had once knelt on a dirty floor and said, "You don't have to stay here anymore," and one who just made sure no one would ever put her there again. The drive to the Pine Grove Police Department was quiet, the kind of quiet that clung to your skin like damp clothes after a storm. Lexi sat in the back seat of Maya's car, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the world passing beyond the window. The town looked unchanged. Same storefronts, same sleepy sidewalks, same families crossing at stoplights. But Lexi knew something had cracked. It wasn't just about her skirt or the baton or Boyd's smirk. It was about how easily it had happened, how natural he had made it seem. Like he had done it before. Like he would do it again. In the driver's seat, Maya kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the base of the radio. She hadn't said much since leaving the park, but her presence filled the vehicle like a second engine. Steady, powerful, unwavering. The woman who had once knelt beside a scared 12-year-old girl in a filthy apartment was still that same anchor, only now the girl beside her wasn't hiding. She was rising. Behind them, in a separate patrol car, Officers Boyd and Ballou were being escorted to the station. Ronda had insisted on following, just in case. She rode behind with her arms crossed, jaw clenched, her eyes never leaving the taillights of the cruiser ahead. She wasn't wearing a badge, but that didn't matter. The weight she carried was heavier than any uniform. When they arrived, Lexi hesitated before getting out of the car. The building loomed over her, glass and brick, clean and clinical. She had never stepped inside before. Never had reason to. It felt more like a courthouse than a place of protection. Maya placed a hand on her shoulder, gentle but firm. "You don't walk in here alone," she said. Lexi nodded and followed her inside. The front desk officer blinked when he saw Maya and stood a little straighter. She showed her badge, and the man quickly waved them through. The hallway smelled like industrial cleaner and stale coffee. The station was busy, but something about Maya's presence cut through the motion. Officers glanced up from desks, paused mid-conversation. One man whispered something to another. Lexi felt their stares like cold air on bare skin. They were escorted to a small conference room where a plainclothes internal affairs officer waited with a clipboard and a stack of forms. The man introduced himself as Lieutenant Harper, his demeanor polite but brisk. He gestured for Lexi to sit, and as she began recounting the events, Maya stood nearby, silent but watchful. Lexi's voice didn't shake. She spoke slowly, carefully, her eyes occasionally flicking toward Maya as if grounding herself. She told them everything. The approach, the questions, the sudden movement of the baton, Boyd's words, Ballou's silence. She didn't embellish, didn't cry. She didn't need to. The truth was heavy enough. When she finished, Harper nodded and turned to Maya. "We've sent for park surveillance footage. Body cam data too, though I'm guessing." "They weren't running them," Maya said flatly. He sighed. "That's what we thought." A knock came at the door. Another officer entered, younger, looking nervous. "Sergeant Williams, you're needed upstairs. Officer Ballou. He's ready to talk." Maya looked at Lexi. "I'll be back soon." Lexi nodded. "I'll be fine." Maya left with a calmness that masked the storm brewing behind her eyes. Upstairs, Ballou sat in a small, windowless interview room, his hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles had gone white. He looked up as Maya entered and gave her a nod that wavered between apology and fear. She didn't sit. "You know what you let happen," she said. Ballou's throat worked. "I didn't touch her. But you didn't stop him." He broke off. "He's my senior. I didn't know what to do. I thought it was a joke. Then it wasn't. Then it was too late." "There's no such thing as too late," Maya said. "There's just what you do after." Baloo swallowed. This wasn't the first time. I mean, I didn't see him do this exactly, but there were comments, patrols he requested specifically. He'd brag after, girls alone, mostly black girls, ones he thought wouldn't speak up. Maya leaned forward slightly. "Names, dates, anything you remember." Baloo hesitated, then nodded. The words came in pieces at first, locker room conversations, drunken boasts, silenced reports. Then it began to pour out. Times Boyd left his body cam accidentally at the station. Shifts rearranged so he could be near school bus stops. A name, Sharon McBride, filed a complaint in 2018 that went nowhere. Baloo remembered because Boyd had laughed about it for weeks. Maya stood still for a long moment after he finished. Then she said, "You've done the right thing. Don't stop now." Downstairs, Lexi had finished her initial statement. She sat alone in the waiting room, the sounds of the station muffled behind thick walls. She picked at the frayed seam of her coat sleeve, staring at the floor. Her mind replayed the moment on the bench in painful clarity, but each time the image of Ronda standing between her and Boyd grew stronger. The door opened, and Ronda stepped inside. She nodded at the desk officer, then walked over and sat beside Lexi. "You okay?" Lexi shrugged. "I don't know." "That's fine," Ronda said. "You don't have to know yet." There was a pause. Lexi turned to her. "You've seen things like this before?" Ronda exhaled through her nose. "Too many. Not always in parks, not always in uniform, but yeah." Lexi looked away. "Why me?" "Because you were alone. Because you were quiet. Because he thought you wouldn't fight back." "I didn't." "You did," Ronda said firmly. "You called someone, you stood up, you spoke. Don't ever let anyone tell you that's not fighting." Lexi's hands tightened around each other. "I don't want to be brave." "No one does," Ronda said. "You just become it when you don't have a choice." At that moment, Maya returned. Her face was unreadable, but she gave a slight nod. "Baloo gave us a lot. Enough to open up older cases." Lexi's heart skipped. Older? There were others. She didn't ask how many. She didn't want to know. Not yet. They left the station together. Outside, the afternoon had stretched into golden light. The clouds had thinned. The air was still cold, but the wind had shifted. It carried something else now. Not peace, not relief, but movement. That night, Lexi sat at her kitchen table with her mother, the overhead light casting a warm glow over their modest apartment. Her mother listened silently as Lexi told her what had happened. The words stumbled at first, but then they found a rhythm. When she finished, her mother reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm proud of you," she said. Lexi didn't cry. She nodded once, and for the first time in her life, she believed the words were true. The next morning, the story had begun to spread. A local news blog picked up a cell phone video from the park. Then a national watchdog reposted it. The headline didn't name Lexi, but her face was in the background, calm, still, silent. And in front of her, Ronda standing firm. Comments began flooding in, some supportive, some cruel, some demanding justice, others calling it overreaction. But the silence was broken. In the coming days, Maya reopened Sharon McBride's file. She reached out. Sharon's number was still active. The woman on the other end of the line hesitated, her voice low and tired. "I was told nothing could be done," she said. "Well," Maya replied, "they didn't have what we have now." Outside, in a different city, Ronda walked into her training facility. A group of teenage girls waited for her, their eyes wide with unspoken questions. She didn't bring up the park. She didn't need to. They had all seen it. Instead, she said, "Today we talk about voice. Because fists could break bones, but voices could break systems." And in a small office, Lexi opened her laptop. A message blinked at her from a stranger, a girl she didn't know. The message was short. "I saw what happened. I've been scared to talk about mine, but maybe I don't have to be anymore." Lexi read it twice, then she wrote back, "You're not alone." Because she wasn't. Not anymore. It began with a phone call in the middle of the night, not from a reporter or a lawyer, not from an officer or a city official, but from a teacher. She had seen the video. She had recognized the look on Lexi's face. Not just the shock or the humiliation, but the stillness, the too familiar stillness of someone used to enduring. She didn't give her name. She just said, "Tell her she's not the only one," and hung up. Lexi lay awake afterward, eyes fixed on the ceiling of her bedroom, the words echoing against the walls of her memory. The next morning, the phone rang again. A former student, a social worker, a grocery clerk, all women, all quiet, all previously unheard, and every call said the same thing in different words. "I thought I was alone." By the end of the week, Maya's desk at Internal Affairs was buried in reopened files. Complaints once closed as unsubstantiated or resolved internally now formed a pattern too precise to ignore. Sharon McBride's case from 2018. A complaint filed by a mother whose teenage daughter had been randomly searched near a bus stop. A university student pulled over for a broken tail light and asked if she was hiding anything under her skirt. Every story different in detail, but the tone was identical. Quiet, hesitant, burdened by the fear of not being believed. Maya worked late into the night, sorting through digital files and physical paperwork that reeked of dust and denial. Her fingers moved methodically, eyes scanning for the smallest threads that could link the past to the present. It wasn't about just catching one man anymore, it was about dragging the entire rotten system into the light. Each folder held more than facts. It held shame and courage and the weight of years spent wondering whether anyone would ever care. At the same time, Ronda's world shifted from the gym to the center of a cultural firestorm. News outlets reached out for interviews. Podcasts requested her voice. Former colleagues from the fighting world sent messages of solidarity or condemnation. Half the town called her a hero. The other half said she had no right to interfere with police business. She didn't care about the noise. She only cared that girls like Lexi now had a face to follow, a name to anchor themselves to. But she also understood that being a symbol was a fragile thing. It could turn into a target just as quickly. Someone smashed the window of her self-defense center on a Wednesday night. Nothing stolen. Just glass shattered and red spray paint on the wall. 3 letters, lie. She stood in front of the building the next morning, the sun rising behind her, and didn't flinch. Later that day, she held class anyway. Lexi watched from the sidelines as Ronda led a group of 10 girls through basic maneuvers. Her presence there wasn't planned. She had just come. The way you visit a place that suddenly matters more than you realized. She sat on the edge of the matted floor, hands folded in her lap, eyes tracing the movements. Ronda didn't acknowledge her directly, but Lexi saw the slight nod in her direction, quiet and steady. That was enough. After class, Ronda handed her a water bottle and gestured to the bench near the window. "You're not just a story anymore," she said. "You're the start of something." Lexi didn't answer immediately. She opened the bottle, took a sip, then looked outside. The street was quiet. A woman walked a dog across the intersection. A child rode a scooter over a crack in the pavement. "I'm scared of what happens next," Lexi admitted, "of being visible, of being asked to speak for people I don't know." "You're not speaking for anyone," Ronda said. "You're making it safe for them to speak for themselves." The following evening, Maya met with Sharon McBride in a small cafe tucked between a laundromat and a barber shop. Sharon arrived in a coat too big for her frame, hair pulled back, eyes guarded. She sat with her hands in her lap and didn't order anything. Maya didn't push. She simply opened the folder, laid out the complaint Sharon had filed nearly 5 years ago, and waited. "I thought I was crazy," Sharon said after a long pause. "They told me I was exaggerating, that he followed procedure, that I was being emotional." "You weren't," Maya said, "and you're not alone." Sharon swallowed hard. "Why now?" "Because someone else said no, and this time someone was listening." The tears didn't fall, but Sharon's shoulders sagged in relief, as if she had been holding a weight too long and hadn't realized until now how heavy it had become. She agreed to testify. Word spread quickly, not through press releases or televised briefings, but through whispers, shared messages, secret conversations in church basements and beauty salons. Women who had never met each other found themselves linked by the invisible thread of survival. They weren't broken. They weren't victims. They were witnesses to the truth. Maya assembled a team of legal aides and community advocates. Statements were gathered, timelines constructed. The names of other officers surfaced, men who had looked the other way, laughed, dismissed complaints, or failed to act. The circle around Boyd widened. Internal Affairs approved a full investigation into not only his conduct, but the culture of silence that had allowed it to thrive. Baloo continued to cooperate. His demeanor had shifted entirely. No longer the nervous rookie trying to fit in, he now spoke like someone seeking redemption, desperate to separate himself from the rot he'd been part of. He named names, recounted stories, described a precinct where silence was a survival tactic and ethics a liability. "I didn't know how to stop it," he said during one meeting. "I thought if I stayed quiet, I was staying safe. But that silence—" He paused. "It cost her something." "It cost a lot of people something," Maya said. Lexi sat through one of the meetings, not to speak, but to watch, to see the system laid bare. It wasn't comforting, but it was clarifying. There were cracks in the walls, and now the light was coming in. Later that night, Lexi received another message from a girl whose name she didn't recognize. It was short, just 6 words. "He used to follow my bus." Lexi stared at the screen, then wrote back, "I believe you." The girl didn't reply, but that didn't matter. Sometimes belief was enough to keep someone from breaking. Rhonda joined Maya in a closed meeting with city officials and oversight representatives. The room was crowded with suits and silence, the kind that thickened like fog around uncomfortable truths. Maya laid out the files. Rhonda spoke only once. "This isn't about a rogue cop," she said. "It's about a system that assumed no one would ever push back." The officials nodded, their expressions unreadable. But when Maya handed over the growing list of statements, confessions, and patterns, even the most cynical among them couldn't deny what they saw. In the days that followed, the first formal charges were filed. Boyd was suspended without pay pending investigation. Internal Affairs agents swept through the precinct, reviewing conduct, digital logs, surveillance files. Officers whispered in break rooms, cleared browser histories, deleted messages. But it was too late. The wave had already begun. Lexi stood in her bedroom one morning, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She had changed, not in any visible way, same face, same eyes, but the way she stood, the way her shoulders lifted instead of folded, the way she met her own gaze, something had shifted. Her mother knocked lightly on the door. "Someone here to see you," she said. Rhonda stood in the living room holding a folded piece of paper. "It's from one of the girls," she said. "She asked me to give it to you." Lexi unfolded it, child's handwriting, blue marker, crooked letters. "You are strong. I saw it." She smiled, small, quiet, but real. That night, Maya pinned a photograph to her office corkboard. Lexi on the park bench, Rhonda standing before her, Boyd in the background. She added a string, connecting it to a photo of Sharon. Then another to the girl at the bus stop. Then Baloo's signed statement. Then the security footage timestamp. The board wasn't a wall of victims. It was a map of voices. And as Maya stood back and looked at it, she realized something profound. They weren't fighting one man. They were unearthing the truth from under years of silence. And truth, once exposed, was hard to bury again. The wind outside rattled the windows. Maya didn't flinch. She reached for the next file. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning to roar. The courtroom felt like a place where truth held its breath. Outside, Pine Grove moved with the same disinterested rhythm it always did. School buses creaked down early morning streets, coffee shops filled with yawning students and weary commuters, and police cruisers passed unnoticed along familiar routes. But inside the municipal courthouse, the silence was heavier. Not just quiet, but dense, like something waiting to crack under the weight of too many years, too many stories, and too few consequences. Lexi stood in the hall near the water fountain, her hands clenched together in front of her. She had chosen her outfit with care. Navy slacks, a soft cream blouse, her braids pulled back into a neat bun. She didn't want to be seen as polished or fragile. She wanted to look like herself, unapologetically, unmistakably herself. Maya stood beside her, her presence as solid and immovable as a tree grown into the ground. Across the corridor, Rhonda leaned against the wall, arms crossed, her eyes scanning every face that passed. Silent, watchful. The building filled steadily. Reporters filed in with notepads and camera phones. Community leaders took up seats in the gallery. There were teachers, nurses, a handful of students from the local college. Lexi saw her mother in the second row, back straight, lips pressed together. Sharon McBride sat one row behind her, quiet but present. They weren't here for spectacle. They were here for justice. Boyd arrived last. He entered through a side door, flanked by his attorney, his posture relaxed in that familiar, careless way. His uniform had been replaced by a tailored gray suit, his badge absent, but he wore the same expression he had on the day he approached Lexi in the park, smug, untouchable. He didn't look at her, not once. Not when he walked in, not when he sat down. Not even when their eyes inevitably met across the polished wood of the courtroom. His lawyer, a man with a smooth voice and expensive shoes, began the proceedings with the kind of practiced gravitas that filled the room with noise, but little substance. He referred to Boyd as a decorated officer, a pillar of the department, and spoke of misinterpretations, procedural ambiguity, and an unfortunate media frenzy. Lexi felt something twist in her stomach, but she didn't flinch. She had heard these words before, used to bury pain, to rationalize cruelty. She had learned that silence wasn't safety. It was permission. And she was done giving it. When her name was called, she stood. The walk to the witness stand felt longer than it should have, each step echoing louder than the last. She sat, placed her hands in her lap, and met the judge's gaze without wavering. "Tell us what happened," the prosecutor said. Lexi nodded once, then she began. "I was sitting on a bench in the park," she said, "reading a book." Her voice was calm, steady. "Two officers approached me. They asked for ID. I offered to get it. One of them, Officer Boyd, said they'd prefer a visual inspection." There was a pause. The gallery was silent. "He used his baton to flip up my skirt." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge banged his gavel once for order, but Lexi didn't look away. She continued. "He laughed, like it was funny, like I didn't matter." The defense attorney leaned forward, voice oily. "Did he touch you?" Lexi's eyes locked on his. "No," she said. "He didn't need to. What he did was about power, about humiliation. He didn't need to touch my skin to leave bruises." The stillness that followed wasn't shock. It was recognition. She finished her testimony and stepped down. As she walked back to her seat, Ronda gave her a slight nod, her expression unreadable but fierce. Maya reached out and brushed her fingers briefly over Lexi's shoulder, a silent acknowledgement, one warrior to another. Sharon McBride testified next. She wore a soft gray sweater and a calm expression, but her hands trembled as she held the edges of the witness stand. Her voice didn't break, though. She had told the story enough times to know where the hurt lived and how to let it out without letting it devour her. 5 years ago, I was pulled over for a broken taillight, she said. Officer Boyd asked if I was nervous. I said no. He said I looked like I was hiding something. Then he told me to get out of the car. She took a breath. He searched me in ways that made me feel like less than a person. She told the court how her complaint was dismissed, how she was told there was no body cam footage, how she was advised not to pursue it. They made me feel crazy, she said, but I wasn't, and now I know that. Another witness rose from the gallery, a woman who hadn't planned to speak but couldn't stay seated. She was in her 30s, hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, voice thin but clear. He used to stand too close when I was waiting for the school bus, she said. He'd ask me if I had a boyfriend. I was 13. The judge allowed her to give a sworn statement on the record. Then Ballou took the stand. He looked different than he had in the park. Less like a cop, more like a man trying to shed a second skin. He didn't make excuses. He didn't deflect. He told the truth. I laughed when it happened, he said. Not because I thought it was funny, but because I didn't know what else to do. I was scared of him, scared of losing my job, so I stayed quiet. He looked across the courtroom at Lexi. But that silence cost her something, and I'm not going to hide behind it anymore. The prosecutor, a woman named Rava Langston, rose for closing arguments. She was composed, her voice low but commanding. This case is not about one moment in the park, she said. It is about a pattern. A man who used his badge to intimidate and degrade, who chose his victims based on how likely they were to be ignored, who relied on silence, on shame, on institutional apathy. She gestured to Lexi, to Sharon, to the others. But they didn't stay silent. And now, neither can we. Boyd never took the stand. His lawyer advised against it. The defense knew the performance was already unraveling. The jury left the courtroom, and the wait began. Lexi sat with Maya and Ronda in the hallway outside the courtroom. The walls were lined with posters about civic duty, public safety, justice. They felt hollow now, paper shields against the storm of lived experience. I don't feel brave, Lexi said softly. Bravery isn't a feeling, Maya said. It's what you do in spite of fear. Lexi nodded, her hands still clasped. What if they let him go? They might, Maya admitted, but if they do, it won't be in silence, and he'll never hide in the shadows again. The courtroom doors opened. The jury filed in. Everyone stood. The foreperson handed the verdict to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. The paper was unfolded. The judge read, voice level, "On the charge of misconduct under color of authority, guilty. On the charge of harassment with intent to degrade, guilty. On the charge of abuse of power, guilty." Lexi didn't cry. Her shoulders didn't shake. Her breath didn't catch, but her hands unclenched slowly, fingers relaxing for the first time in what felt like years. She looked at Boyd. He didn't look back. He stared at the floor as if the act of acknowledgement was more than he could bear. Maya's gaze was steady. Rhonda stood tall. Boyd was cuffed without ceremony. The sound of the metal closing around his wrists was quiet, but it carried through the room like a verdict itself. Final, irrevocable. Outside, the sky had begun to clear. Light spilled down through gaps in the courthouse archways, washing the steps in gold. Lexi and Maya stood at the top for a long moment, Rhonda just behind them. That was brave, Maya said. Lexi shook her head. That was overdue. Maya smiled faintly. How do you feel? Lexi looked out over the town. Like I'm finally standing in my own name. Maya nodded. That's the first break. The wall doesn't fall all at once, but once it cracks, it doesn't stop. Lexi's lips curved, small and sure. Then let's keep cracking it. They walked down the steps together, not as victims, not as enforcers, but as something more enduring. Survivors, builders, witnesses, and behind them the courthouse stood tall and still, a place that had, for one day at least, remembered what it was built for. The wind that moved through Pine Grove the morning after the verdict was softer than usual, touched with the scent of coming rain and something quieter, something clean. In the eastern part of the park, the same bench still stood beside the lake, the same trees leaned over the gravel path, and the same silence lingered, but it had changed. It no longer felt like avoidance. It felt like recovery. A place catching its breath after being held too long. Lexi sat alone on that bench again, though the weight she carried now was different. Not lighter, but earned. Her hands rested in her lap, one palm covering the other, her spine straight. She didn't look behind her, though she knew Maya was nearby, leaning against the trunk of a tree not far off. She didn't need to see her to feel her presence, just like she didn't need to speak to know that this moment belonged to something much larger than her. Rhonda arrived with no fanfare. She walked the path slowly, a coffee in each hand, wearing jeans, a charcoal hoodie, and the same firm expression that had never softened for the public. She sat beside Lexi without a word, handing her one of the cups. They drank quietly, the lake reflecting a milky gray sky above them. "He's gone," Lexi said after a while. "Not gone," Rhonda answered. "Just visible. Finally." Lexi nodded. She felt it too, the difference between erasure and defeat. Boyd might never wear a badge again, but the system that had let him thrive still stood, tall and quiet and dangerous. It would not crumble from one verdict, but it had cracked, and she had helped do it. "I've been thinking," Lexi said. "What if we built something?" Rhonda tilted her head slightly. "Built? For girls like me, for women like Sharon, even the ones who still don't know how to speak. A place where you don't have to explain why it hurt, where someone listens before asking questions." Rhonda looked out at the lake. "A place where the silence ends." Lexi nodded. "Yeah, They sat there for a long time, not needing to talk, not needing to justify the stillness. When they finally stood, it was with the quiet resolve of people who had lived through the fire and come out whole on the other side. Over the next week, Lexi worked in silence, but not alone. She cleared space in her mother's garage for planning materials, began sketching logos on scraps of printer paper, and sent messages to every girl and woman who had reached out during the investigation. Most didn't reply immediately. Some never did, but many did. And of those, more than a dozen asked one question: what now? Lexi had her answer. She called it the silent stand. She worked late into the evenings between part-time classes and shifts at the bookstore. Maya dropped off resource lists and referrals, sometimes in person, sometimes slipped through the mail slot. Rhonda brought coffee and printed articles about community grant applications. They didn't hover. They didn't direct. They stood behind her like pillars, solid, unyielding. By the end of the second week, Lexi had a name, a mission statement, and 36 sign-ups. Most were teenagers. Some were older women who'd never spoken publicly before. One was a 12-year-old who simply wrote, "I want to feel safe on my walk to school." Lexi kept that one taped to the inside of her notebook. She met Maya one afternoon at a diner just outside City Hall. Maya had officially requested reassignment from active internal affairs duty to community outreach. Less bureaucracy, more contact. It wasn't the badge she cared about anymore. It was what came after it. They sat across from each other in a booth, an open folder between them filled with planning drafts and workshop outlines. "You've got something here," Maya said. "People are watching." "I don't want to be a symbol," Lexi replied. "I just want to build something that lasts." That's what real change looks like. Lexi looked up. "Do you think they'll let us? The city?" Maya smiled faintly. "They won't have a choice." Later that evening, back in the park, Lexi watched a group of high school girls walk toward the bench. They moved hesitantly, giggling in hushed tones, but their eyes were wide and curious. Lexi greeted them with a smile and passed out flyers. No pressure, no speeches, just a meeting place, just time to talk. When the girls left, one stayed behind. She was small, maybe 8 or 9, with hair pulled into uneven puffs and scuffed sneakers that squeaked slightly as she walked. She clutched a white envelope in both hands. "Are you Lexi?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "I am," Lexi said, kneeling slightly. "My sister said you're the reason she told Mom what her coach did." Lexi's breath caught. "She wanted me to give you this." Lexi took the envelope with both hands. Inside was a folded sheet of notebook paper filled with Lupin bubble letters written in purple ink. "You changed something. Thank you." Lexi didn't cry. She pressed the note to her chest and breathed. Later, Maya met her near the lake. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small brass lapel pin shaped like an open eye. "This belonged to a woman I worked with in D.C., she said. "She used to say justice isn't about revenge. It's about remembering." She pinned it gently to Lexi's coat just above her heart. "You remember now, and you're helping others do the same." Lexi looked down at the badge, then back at the water. "I used to think power belonged to people with badges, or cameras, or muscles." Maya raised an eyebrow. "And now?" "Now, I think it's about knowing your story matters." Maya nodded slowly. "And telling it anyway." They walked away from the bench, two women from different generations, but bound by something stronger than age or history. Truth, earned and shared. And behind them, the bench remained quiet, but not untouched. A soft breeze lifted through the trees, catching a single golden leaf, sending it spinning gently downward. It landed on the armrest of the bench, a silent marker of where it broke and where it began again. 3 weeks after the verdict, autumn deepened its hold on Pine Grove, and the trees, once silent witnesses to everything left unsaid, had begun to shed their final leaves. The maple at the center of the park, tall and weathered, stood ablaze with orange and gold, a soft fire among bare-limbed companions. Beneath its outstretched canopy sat Lexi Riley, wrapped in a wool coat and a scarf her mother had knitted the winter after her father left. In her lap was a folder, creased, cluttered, purposeful. On its cover, hand-lettered in black marker, were 3 words that had come to define the last month of her life: the silent stand. The bench creaked faintly beneath her as she shifted. Around her, the park buzzed in small ways. Children shrieked in delight as they chased one another through piles of brittle leaves. A jogger with earbuds kept a steady pace along the loop trail. Somewhere farther off, a dog barked, a bell jingled. Life moved on, but Lexi wasn't watching from the edges anymore. She was inside it now, breathing the same air, part of the same rhythm. She flipped open the folder and scanned the latest names on the sign-up sheet. 36 had grown to 52. Some names were scrawled in block letters, others in lupin cursive. A few had come with notes, short messages like, "I don't know how to tell it yet," or "Please don't say my name." Lexi kept every one. A shadow moved across the paper. She looked up. Ronda stood beside her, holding 2 cups of coffee. She wore a long wool coat over a hoodie, her hair pulled back tight. There was something more grounded about her lately, as if the weeks since the trial had chipped away the defensive shell she'd carried for years. She handed Lexi a cup and sat beside her, exhaling steam into the cool air. "You really named it that?" she asked, nodding toward the folder. Lexi smiled faintly. "It was never silent," she said. "I just didn't know how loud it was until someone listened." They drank in comfortable quiet. Ronda stretched her legs out in front of her, watching a toddler trip and catch herself with surprising grace. She grinned. "How many girls now?" 52, Lexi said. "Mostly high schoolers, a few older women, 1 college counselor, and a janitor from the middle school." She said she used to see Boyd parked outside during lunch, but never thought it meant anything. Rhonda's expression tightened. "It always meant something." Lexi nodded. "I've been thinking about hosting the first official circle next week," she said. "Just a space, no pressure, no cameras, just truth and tea." "Good," Ronda replied. "They need a place where nobody looks away." A breeze lifted through the park then, rattling the last of the leaves overhead. 1 golden flake drifted down slowly and landed on Lexi's folder. She brushed it off gently, almost reverently, as though acknowledging the moment without disrupting it. Later that day, Lexi visited a local community center with her mother, who had taken a rare day off to help her daughter scout potential locations for regular gatherings. The building smelled of old varnish and lemon cleaner, and the receptionist, an elderly woman with sharp eyes and a kind smile, seemed genuinely excited by the idea. "We've had parenting classes and voter drives and even a salsa class last year," she said. "But never anything like this." Lexi handed her a flyer. "It's not just about what happened. It's about making sure it doesn't keep happening." The woman folded the flyer carefully, as if it were a contract. "You let me know what you need." As they stepped outside, Lexi's mother paused on the steps and turned to her. "You've grown," she said, "not taller, but deeper. I can see it." Lexi looked at her, surprised. Her mother rarely spoke in metaphors. I thought I would be angry forever, she admitted. At him, at the silence, at myself. And now? I feel clean, Lexi said, like I got out of something I didn't even know I'd been breathing in. Her mother nodded. They walked down the sidewalk together, arms brushing. The city around them seemed just a little more open. That evening, Maya invited Lexi and Rhonda to her apartment for dinner. It was a small place on the second floor of an older building near the heart of the city, filled with soft light, worn bookshelves, and the scent of roasted vegetables and rosemary. The meal was simple but warm. Baked chicken, couscous, steamed greens, and the conversation shifted between quiet jokes and quiet gratitude. After the plates were cleared, Maya retrieved something from a small wooden box near her bookshelf and returned to the table. It was a pin, brass, in the shape of an open eye. This belonged to a woman I worked with in D.C., she said. She used to say, justice isn't about punishment, it's about remembering. She held it out to Lexi. You remember now, and you're helping others do the same. Lexi took it with both hands. The metal was cool and heavy. She pinned it to her coat the next morning before heading back to the park. Not out of pride, but out of promise. She found a girl waiting by the bench, no more than 10, skinny arms folded across a puffy pink jacket. She looked up when Lexi approached. My sister said you helped her, she said simply. Is your sister okay? Lexi asked. She is now. She wanted me to give you this. The girl handed her a folded note and ran off before Lexi could say anything more. She opened the paper slowly. Thank you for making her brave. Lexi stared at the words for a long moment, then tucked the note into her coat pocket beside the brass pin. Later that week, the silent stand held its first circle. 10 women sat in folding chairs arranged in a wide ring in a quiet room at the community center. The walls were bare, the lighting soft. In the center sat nothing but a ceramic teapot and a stack of blank notebooks. Lexi didn't open with a speech. She didn't tell them how to feel. She simply sat and waited. Eventually, one voice broke the quiet. I never told anyone because I thought no one would believe me. Then another. I thought it was my fault. Then another. He said I was lucky it wasn't worse. The words came like water from a cracked pipe, uneven, pressurized, unstoppable. Lexi didn't write them down. She didn't need to. They lived now. When the meeting ended, one woman stayed behind. She was in her 60s, hair gray at the roots, eyes red-rimmed but dry. You're younger than my granddaughter, she said, but today you made me feel whole. Lexi hugged her. It wasn't planned, it wasn't careful, it was real. That night, Lexi sat in bed with her notebook open, jotting down ideas for the next circle. A space for younger girls, a session for educators, a training for bystanders. Her world had expanded, not with chaos, but with clarity. Maya called just before midnight. I wanted you to know, she said. Boyd filed an appeal. It was denied. Lexi closed her eyes. Thank you. And thank you, Maya said, for not just standing up, for standing still, and letting the world see what strength really looks like. When the call ended, Lexi stepped outside onto the porch. The night air was cold and crisp, the stars scattered like glass. She thought of everything that had brought her to this moment. Of the bench, of the baton, of the voice that had once trembled with fear and now spoke with quiet conviction. A gust of wind swept through the neighborhood. Another golden leaf drifted down and landed softly at her feet. She picked it up, studied its veins, then let it go. It floated off into the dark. She turned, went inside, and closed the door behind her. The story wasn't finished, but the silence was. If you found this story meaningful, consider subscribing for more. Watch the next video to continue exploring stories like this, and if this spoke to you, share it with someone who should see it.